2 seconds. That's all it took for the entire cafeteria to realize that this morning wouldn't play out like any other. 2 seconds in which the metal kettle began to tilt, the old man instinctively pulled back, and the tattooed giant, completely convinced of his own dominance, prepared for what he assumed would be just another display of power. Stay with me until the end, because what happened after that moment became pure prison legend. It was so intense, so unexpected, that even the most seasoned inmates froze where they stood, and the guards, who'd seen every kind of fight imaginable, lost their breath for a split second. Before we dive in, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps this story reach more people and motivates me to bring you more real, raw narratives filled with twists just like this one. Now let's continue, because what comes next completely rewrites everything you think you know about strength, respect, and identity. The cafeteria was packed, metal trays clattering, quick conversations echoing, boots shuffling down the hall, just another morning inside a maximum security prison. Everything looked like any other day, except for one detail that changed the entire atmosphere: the old man's presence. A white-haired man, fragile at first glance, shoulders slightly slumped, eyes always lowered toward his tray. He didn't draw attention. He was the kind of inmate most believed the system had simply forgotten there. And maybe that was exactly why the bully had chosen him. Behind him walked the man who was about to change the entire narrative in that cafeteria. A massive, tattoo-covered giant with a chest full of ink that looked like old battle maps. He moved with the confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. His heavy, dragging footsteps echoed through the hall like he was marking territory, and in his hand he held a metal kettle, plain, ordinary, yet in his grip it carried a darker purpose: intimidation. The old man was hunched forward, trying to pour himself a little water. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from age. No one paid attention to him. Most inmates just kept eating, treating the moment like another casual reminder of the cruel hierarchy that ruled a place overflowing with invisible tensions. The only person who seemed truly aware was the man sitting beside him. Blue uniform, number 407 on his chest, sharp eyes, posture straight and unwavering. He didn't look directly at the old man or at the approaching giant. He watched everything with the calm of someone who senses movements before they happen. It was as if his mind was quietly mapping out the scene, as if he already knew the fragile balance of the room was about to crack. And then, everything converged into one single moment. The giant lifted the kettle. The old man didn't see it, but inmate 407 did, and he didn't move. He just kept eating, like he was waiting for something nobody else could foresee. A few heads slowly turned, forming an invisible ring of anticipation. The cafeteria seemed to fall into a strange silence, even though the noise still echoed around. Every sound felt distant, smothered, unable to compete with the gravity of the moment unfolding in front of them. What no one knew, what would make this story unforgettable, was who that old man really was. The entire prison saw him as a frail, powerless figure. But the truth was far beyond appearances. He carried something no one could see: training, history, precision, a lifetime built in places where discipline and intelligence mattered far more than muscles and tattoos. And in that instant, everything shifted. One man's arrogance pushed the cafeteria to the edge of a revelation that would shake everyone in that room. The kettle tilted, water began to fall. The giant smirked, convinced he had total control of the situation. But that was the last second he would ever think that. Because in just a few moments, seconds that people inside that prison still talk about, he would discover that the man he tried to intimidate wasn't just some helpless old-timer. He was someone who would turn the bully's downfall into a lesson carved in stone, a lesson no one would ever forget. And this is where our story truly begins. Koban Penitentiary wasn't just known for being strict. It was known for swallowing men whole, erasing their stories, and turning even the strongest into shadows of who they once were. Its cell blocks were cold, lit by tired fluorescent bulbs that flickered like they were worn out from absorbing years of tension. Inside those walls, nothing happened by accident. Every stare, every step, every silence carried weight. That place had its own rules, and anyone who didn't learn them fast enough usually learned them too late. The guards walked around with the expression of men who'd seen everything, but contrary to what outsiders might think, they weren't the ones people feared the most. In Koban, real power circulated among the inmates themselves. Alliances, rivalries, debts, favors, and unspoken codes that decided who had room to breathe and who lived one mistake away from chaos. Among all those groups, one figure towered over the rest, Goro Tanaka, the tattooed brute. He wasn't just big, he occupied more space than his body actually took, like his presence pushed the air away. His tattoos told stories no one dared ask about. Most inmates preferred imagining the truth rather than discovering it firsthand. Goro ruled the cafeteria, the yard, half of Block B, and every man too scared to challenge him. He was the kind of guy who enjoyed being feared, and he pulled it off effortlessly. But even in a place dominated by raw strength, there was someone else who drew attention for completely different reasons. Inmate 407. He was different. Not the strongest, not the loudest, but he carried himself with the posture of someone molded by discipline. He spoke little, observed everything, never started trouble, but never backed down when someone tried to test him. The guards knew he had an unusual past, though no one could piece together exactly what it was. Some inmates swore he used to be a cop. Others were convinced he'd been a soldier. A few whispered he might have been a spy, but none of it was ever confirmed. The old man, however, was an even bigger mystery. Always sitting in the far corner of the cafeteria, he looked far too fragile for a place like that. Silver hair, slow steps, trembling hands, he seemed like the type of man who wouldn't last a week in Koban. And yet, he'd been there for months, untouched, unharmed. It was as if violence refused to reach him, as if protecting him was an instinct that only the faint traces of humanity left inside those walls could explain. But what no inmate knew, what no guard ever suspected, was that the old man had lived a life that would make even Goro think twice before laying a finger on him. While everyone else saw frailty, there were other details, tiny, almost invisible, that told a completely different story. The way he held his utensils with surgical precision, the way his eyes scanned the room, mapping threats no one else noticed, his controlled breathing, his posture which, despite his age, never fully sagged. The old man wasn't just another elderly inmate trying to get by. He was someone who carried knowledge, technique, and experience, all hidden behind the perfect disguise of vulnerability. And now, sitting beside him, was inmate 407, the only one who seemed to notice there was more beneath the surface. He didn't treat the old man like a burden. He moved with a quiet respect, almost a subtle reverence. There was something about their dynamic that made sense, though no one could explain why. But the truth was about to come out, in a way no one expected. Because in a place where physical strength was the currency of power, Goro was about to find out that intimidating someone without knowing their past is the most dangerous mistake a bully can make. And that mistake would send shockwaves through the entire prison. The moment before the liquid felt frozen in time, as if the entire cafeteria had inhaled at once and forgotten how to breathe. The tilted kettle caught the cold light from the flickering bulbs above, casting a metallic gleam that announced exactly what was about to happen. And that's when the conflict began. Not with a shout, not with a shove, but with something far quieter and far more dangerous. The brute's absolute certainty that he was in control. Goro, confident as ever, wore the smug grin of a man who believed he stood above everyone. He didn't see a helpless old man. He saw an easy target, a warning shot to the room, a reminder that no one sat anywhere without his approval. Breaking his order meant humiliation, and that was the game he played better than anyone. His pride, his power, his throne. But that day would be different. As the first drops of liquid slid down the edge of the kettle, inmate 407 finally lifted his eyes. Not sharply, not angrily, but with the deliberate precision of someone analyzing an opponent's next move. He didn't stand, didn't shout, didn't reach out to stop anything. He simply watched Goro with the cold detachment of a man who'd seen far worse than this. That look was the first sign something was off. A few inmates caught it. Others looked away, uncomfortable. A hush began spreading through the cafeteria like a ripple. Conversations slowed, utensils clattered less. Even the guards, without realizing it, grew more alert. The old man lifted his head slowly. His expression wasn't fear or submission. It was centered, clear. An expression that didn't match someone fragile. It felt as if, behind those calm eyes, there was an ocean of experience sealed away. He studied the reflection on the kettle for a brief second, as if he'd already calculated the exact force of Goro's movement, the weight of the metal, the angle of the pour, and inmate 407 noticed that. "Don't do it," he said, his voice steady, unchanged. Goro chuckled. A low, heavy, mocking laugh. "And what are you gonna do about it?" he taunted. That was the mistake. It had always been the mistake, believing brute strength is the only kind that matters. The old man didn't move an inch. He simply straightened his posture, rolled his shoulders back. A small gesture, almost invisible, yet so precise that several inmates felt a sudden chill, like something had been activated, like the air itself had shifted around him. The giant, blinded by his own ego, didn't notice. But 407 did. He saw how the old man planted one foot slightly behind the other, how his fingers relaxed against the table, how his breathing slowed into a pattern that felt rehearsed over years. This wasn't fear, it was preparation. And in that second, the real conflict took shape. It wasn't between the old man and Goro. It wasn't between strength and weakness. It was ignorance versus truth. Arrogance versus experience. Something was about to happen, and no one in that cafeteria was ready to see it. The rising tension between the old man and Goro was only the surface of something much bigger. Koban prison had always operated like a living organism, full of factions, silent codes, discreet alliances, and rivalries that moved like underground currents. And every one of those invisible forces reacted to the slightest shift in balance. That simple act of disrespect, that single drop of water about to fall from a metal kettle, was enough to send ripples through the entire cell block. The older inmates knew that. The newer ones were still learning, and the guards pretended they saw nothing. At the tables in the back, the orange block inmates, not the strongest group, but easily the most observant, watched in silence, exchanging quick glances. Goro's behavior wasn't surprising to them. What was surprising was the old man. Someone who had never drawn attention, suddenly becoming the center of a silent standoff. It was as if everyone was trying to answer a question they hadn't even been able to form until that moment. Why did that man, of all people, bother the bully so much? At a table to the left, a small crew known as the Sons of Silence also kept their eyes on the scene. They specialized in noticing details others overlooked, and in that moment, they picked up something almost everyone else missed. The way inmate 407 looked at the old man wasn't normal. It wasn't protection. It wasn't pity. It wasn't friendship. It was recognition, as if he knew exactly who that old man was, even though he'd never said a word about it. One inmate whispered, "You catch that? This old guy, he knows exactly what he's doing." "Yeah," another muttered, "and Goro picked the wrong man today." The comment jumped from table to table, turning into fast-moving whispers, tiny sparks before a wildfire. And the more those rumors spread, the more inmates turned their heads, drawn toward the confrontation like spectators to an incoming storm. But another subplot was forming at the same time. Quieter, deeper. On the upper mezzanine, two guards were speaking in low voices while keeping watch over the cafeteria below. One was a veteran who had worked there for years, who knew every pattern the prison followed. The other was new, still learning how Koban breathed. "That old man," the veteran guard murmured, "he doesn't show up in the old system, only in the new one. I checked his file yesterday and something's off." "Off how?" the rookie asked. He came in with direct approval from the top. No details, no history, no transfer record, just a name and one sealed note. The rookie swallowed hard. "That sounds dangerous." "It does," the veteran replied. "But I don't think he's the danger. The danger is someone messing with him." Those words would never reach the inmates, not yet, but they explained plenty. Meanwhile, Goro kept performing his little show, believing the scene belonged entirely to him. He was completely oblivious to the subtle changes around him. Tables going silent, conversations dying mid-sentence, spoons freezing mid-air. The entire cafeteria now revolved around him and the old man, like the two were connected by an invisible wire pulling everyone's attention. And at the center of that web of subplots stood inmate 407. He knew more than he let on. He knew who the old man really was. He understood exactly what that small shift in posture meant. It was preparation, discreet, invisible to anyone who relied on brute strength, but clear as daylight to someone who recognized technique, mastery, and self-control. 407 didn't hold back out of arrogance or recklessness. He simply trusted. Because even though no one else knew it yet, the old man had faced men far larger than Goro, and defeated every single one of them without ever raising his voice. All the subplots were in place: Goro's pride, the old man's mystery, 407's perception, the guard's silent warning, the inmates' rising anticipation. The board was set, and every piece, whether they realized it or not, was already in position. What would happen next would shift the balance of power inside Koban forever. The moment right before the impact felt too quiet to be real. The metal kettle tilted a little farther, sending a thin line of water sliding toward the old man's head. It was a simple action, almost meaningless to anyone who didn't understand how Koban worked. But in that cafeteria, that gesture broke boundaries. A direct challenge, an open provocation that shook every invisible code holding that system together. And then came the first sign. So small only a few noticed. The old man lifted his eyes, not quickly, not startled, but with calculated precision, as if analyzing a complex equation rather than a threat. Goro, convinced he was seconds away from making the entire room laugh, didn't notice the shift in atmosphere, but inmate 407 did. He saw the way the old man subtly shifted his weight, moved his hips just an inch, and placed one hand on the table, not for support, but for leverage. That single movement was enough to tell anyone who truly understood combat. The old man was ready. Then came the second signal, even smaller, yet far more crucial. The sound, not the sound of water falling, nor trays scraping on metal. A faint, dry tap, almost inaudible. The old man drumming his fingertips lightly against the steel table. A short, rhythmic touch, like he was awakening long-buried memories. Not tremor, not uncertainty, but technique. Goro, meanwhile, kept smiling, wearing the expression of someone who believed he was at the very top of the food chain. Someone who had never learned to fear what he didn't understand. "Well, well, look who finally woke up," he laughed, as if the entire moment existed solely for his entertainment. But his smile lasted exactly 3 seconds. The turning point began when the old man raised his head fully, his eyes, clear, steady, deep, locked onto Goro's for the first time. There was no anger in them, no fear, no defiance. There was knowledge, a kind of clarity most men there had never witnessed. The look of someone who had lived through real danger, faced truly deadly opponents, and now saw Goro as nothing more than a child pretending to be strong, and that alone was enough to change the room's energy. The experienced inmates saw it instantly. "That look," one muttered. "That's the look of someone who can drop a man without breaking a sweat." And the guards on the mezzanine exchanged uneasy glances. Even inmate 407 straightened his posture, as if preparing to witness something rare. Goro, confused, tilted the kettle further, not out of arrogance now, but irritation. Something in that look had rattled him. It exposed him, diminished him, and when a bully feels small, he loses control. But control no longer belonged to him. With a movement so subtle it looked accidental, the old man slid his chair a few inches backward. The stream of water, meant to hit him, fell through the air and splashed harmlessly onto the floor, missing him by mere millimeters. The precision was so perfect it triggered an immediate wave of murmurs. How the hell did he do that? He dodged it without even looking. The giant stepped back, startled, still not understanding the magnitude of what was unfolding, and then the old man did something no one expected. He inhaled, slowly, deeply, as if traveling back in time. And then he spoke for the first time. "You should have chosen another day." The phrase wasn't threatening, it wasn't aggressive. It was calm, but carried a weight that froze the room. Certainty. Goro stepped back half a pace, not out of fear, but instinct. The kind of instinct that only kicks in when the body senses danger long before the mind can process it. The old man, still seated, straightened his spine as if every vertebra were clicking into its rightful place. His shoulders loosened. His hands grew steady, his center of gravity adjusted with surgical precision, and in that second, everyone realized this wasn't a helpless old man, not just another inmate. He was trained. He was dangerous. He was someone who was about to drop the biggest bully in the prison in a matter of seconds. The turning point was complete, and now no one in that room could predict what would happen next. The silence that swept across the cafeteria after the old man spoke wasn't normal. It wasn't the kind of silence born from curiosity, it was the kind that comes from fear, a sudden, raw fear that made even the men who ruled Koban swallow hard. For a brief moment, it felt as if the prison walls themselves had sensed the weight hidden inside those words. Goro, the resident brute, tried to pull the situation back under his control. His face, once full of swagger, now showed a confusion almost no one had ever seen on him. He stepped forward, trying to reassert dominance, but the confidence just wasn't there anymore. Everyone saw it. The spark in his eyes flickered. His posture wavered, like the floor under him had dropped 2 inches. Inmate 407 watched carefully. He didn't smile. He didn't stand. He didn't say a word. But his eyes carried a different shine, the kind someone gets when they see an old secret resurface after decades buried. He knew that in this exact moment, Goro had committed the final mistake, underestimating someone whose past lay far outside the comprehension of that prison. Around the room, every table reacted in its own way. The younger inmates whispered, trying to figure out what they were witnessing. Some thought it was luck, others thought it was an optical trick. But the older inmates, the ones who had seen truly dangerous men, didn't move at all. Their eyes locked onto the old man, dissecting every detail, every breath, every subtle shift. And the more they looked, the clearer the truth became. That old man knew combat. That old man had trained reflexes. That old man was not who he appeared to be. Up on the mezzanine, the guards, who normally ignored minor scuffles, were suddenly tense. The veteran guard tightened his grip on the radio, not to call backup, but out of precaution. There was something in the air, something off balance, something that shouldn't be touched was being touched now. "You saw that move?" the rookie murmured. "I did," the veteran replied. And I don't want to be near him when he decides to show what he can really do. Down on the cafeteria floor, Goro tried to regain his posture. "Who do you think you are, old man?" he demanded, his voice smaller than he meant. "You think you can mess with me?" But his words trembled. And when a bully trembles, everyone knows. The old man didn't answer. He took a single second to adjust his footing, bending his left knee slightly and grounding his weight at the center of his spine, the stance of someone ready to react, not with anger, but with precision, and that bothered Goro more than any insult could. Inmates around them watched with wide eyes, memorizing the moment. This was about to become Koban history. Some secretly wanted to see Goro fall. Others wanted to know whether the old man truly was everything he seemed in that moment, but all of them were hypnotized. "You don't get it," inmate 407 whispered, voice low enough that only those nearby heard. "He's not afraid. He's just waiting for you to decide how fast you want to go down." Those words spread among the inmates in seconds, and with that, the entire atmosphere shifted. It wasn't curiosity anymore, wasn't surprise, it was anticipation. Because for the first time, the brute's fall felt inevitable, and everyone wanted to see how it would happen. Feeling the weight of dozens of eyes, Goro took another step forward, bigger, more aggressive, but clumsy. He puffed out his chest, trying to rebuild his aura of dominance, but insecurity leaked through every pore. "I'm gonna teach you to respect," he began. But he never finished, because in that instant, the old man raised his hand. Not to strike, not to block, just to stop the kettle that was still dripping. The gesture was so fast and yet so subtle that no one could understand how his fingers had landed on the exact point needed to control the object without spilling another drop. It wasn't strength, it was skill, technique. And that perfect execution shattered the last fragment of confidence inside Goro. The brute stepped back, for real. A full step. And when a tyrant steps back in front of everyone, he's never the same again. A low murmur spread through the cafeteria. The guards leaned closer to the railing. Inmate 407 smiled for the first time. The old man simply set the kettle on the table, calm, precise, as if nothing had happened. And that was the moment everyone realized Goro's fate was sealed, because the one who falls isn't the one who's weaker. It's the one who believes he can never fall. After the moment when the old man stopped Goro's movement with the precision of someone who had lived through far more dangerous situations, something deep shifted inside the cafeteria. It wasn't a visible change. No shouting, no shoving, no chaos. The change lived in the eyes of the inmates, in the silent realization that what they had just witnessed wasn't coincidence, wasn't luck. It was skill. It was experience. It was something that challenged everything they thought they knew about weakness and strength. The old man took a slow breath, keeping his posture upright, hands resting on the table as if giving Goro time to decide his next step. It was a display of self-control so profound that even the most aggressive inmates hesitated before making any move. It was as if he reminded everyone that there is a kind of power that doesn't depend on muscles, tattoos, or intimidation. A power that comes from within, built over years, forged in moments of true survival. And that presence began to reshape the inmates' perception. The younger ones, who once laughed or looked away, now watched with respect. They saw the old man hadn't trembled, hadn't yelled, hadn't lost control. They saw he hadn't reacted out of ego, but out of necessity. And most of all, they saw he possessed absolute mastery over himself. Inside Koban, that was rare, unbelievably rare. The kind of thing only seen in men who had undergone real training or lived through experiences too intense for anyone else to understand. Inmate 407 changed too. He had always respected the old man, always treated him differently from the others, but now there was something new in his eyes. Confirmation. It was as if he finally had proof of something he had sensed from the day the old man first entered the prison. He straightened in his chair, drew a deep breath, and let a quiet pride settle into his posture. Goro, on the other hand, felt the shift like an invisible punch. He, who had always relied on intimidation to survive, now faced someone who not only resisted his dominance, but disarmed it without raising his voice. That involuntary step back from moments earlier burned inside him. He had never backed down from another inmate, never ceded space, and now he had stepped back from an old man. It was an internal wound, the kind that hurts more because no one needs to say a word. Everyone saw it. But contrary to what many expected, the old man didn't take advantage of it. He didn't lift a hand against Goro. He didn't humiliate him. He didn't expose him. He simply closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if remembering something important, and then said something that echoed through the hall. "Nobody here needs to fall today." The line sounded simple, but it carried depth. To some inmates it felt like mercy, to others authority. To Goro, it felt like an invitation to reclaim a part of himself, and to inmate 407, it was a lesson. Because right then, everyone realized something very few people inside Koban ever understood. The old man wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't trying to dominate anyone. He was simply showing that true strength doesn't need to impose itself. It simply exists, and exists in such a solid, unshakable way that no external threat can topple it. That posture began to influence everyone around. One inmate from the orange block, known for always causing trouble, lowered his eyes as if learning a silent lesson. Another, carrying years of bottled-up anger, breathed deeply, having seen in the old man a kind of stability he'd never found anywhere. Even the guards on the mezzanine exchanged a look of recognition, the kind shared by people who understand something rare is happening right before them. The growth wasn't just for the old man. It was for everyone. For those who learned not to underestimate anyone, for those who understood that true strength is calm, for those who, for the first time, saw a bully step back because of wisdom, not fear, and especially for Goro, who in that moment, even if he didn't admit it, began to realize he had a lot more to learn, and that maybe his path to redemption was starting right there. That moment didn't solve everything, didn't end tensions, didn't erase rivalries. But it changed something fundamental, everyone's perception of who truly held power inside Koban. And this was only the beginning. After the moment when the old man demonstrated absolute control, Koban's cafeteria fell into a silence no alarm, no guards shout, and no clatter of trays could break. It was as if everyone there was trying to grasp what was truly at stake. To an outside observer, the scene might have looked simple. A brute stepping back, an old man sitting still, a kettle resting quietly on the table. But to those who lived inside that closed environment full of invisible rules, it was an earthquake. The old man didn't move. He didn't need to. He remained seated with his spine straight, as if his own breathing were the metronome controlling the entire room. His eyes were half-lidded, aware of everything around him, but without a shred of aggression. It was as if he were waiting for the universe's next move, not Goro's. And that alone made the atmosphere heavier than any physical confrontation ever could. Goro, meanwhile, battled something inside himself, a storm of emotions he had always suppressed to maintain his violent reputation. That involuntary step backward still echoed in his mind. He tried to compose himself, but every attempt failed because the old man's gaze remained there, steady, calm, impossible to escape. It felt like being evaluated by someone who knew every human weakness before it even appeared. Inmate 407 leaned slightly forward, as if watching pieces move on a board. He wasn't concerned about the old man, and that said everything. His concern was Goro, not out of dislike, but because he knew that if Goro made the wrong decision now, the consequences would ripple far beyond the two of them. The balance inside the prison was fragile, and one impulsive action could trigger a chain reaction no one could stop. The tables around them had become silent bleachers. Every inmate watched with absolute focus. No one ate, no one spoke. Some crossed their arms, others clenched their hands, and others simply breathed slowly, trying not to miss a single detail of the rising tension. It was like watching a storm form on the horizon, not because they wanted chaos, but because they knew the previous calm would never return. Up on the mezzanine, the guards repositioned themselves. They knew they couldn't intervene without cause. Protocol was clear, but they also knew this wasn't just a fight. This was a shift in power. A shift that rarely happened without deep consequences. The veteran guard was the first to notice. "It's not the old man controlling this," he murmured. "It's his posture. He's making Goro think too much." And that was the truth. Goro breathed heavily, trying to understand what made that frail man seem so unshakably secure. He tried to convince himself he still had control, tightening his fists, shifting his weight, lifting his chin. But none of it changed the fact that the old man remained seated, unmoved, as if he had all the time in the world. And then came the first movement leading toward the climax. One of the orange block inmates, noticing how lost Goro was, took a careful step to the side, as if ready to back him up if things spiraled out of control. But before his foot even settled fully on the floor, the old man opened his eyes and looked straight at him. A brief glance, sharp, precise, direct, so intense that the inmate recoiled instantly. That detail did not go unnoticed. "He saw everything, without even turning his head," one inmate whispered. "This old man, he's not just old," another added. Goro saw it too, and it made him even more uneasy. Without raising his voice, the old man exhaled like someone carrying decades of responsibility. Then, in a soft tone filled with weight and meaning, he said, "Think carefully about your next move." And in that exact moment, Koban understood. The true confrontation was about to begin, not through violence, but through revelation. The climax was one step away. The entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath as the old man finished his sentence. "Think carefully about your next move." It was the final drop in Goro's mind. His pride, wounded in front of everyone, wouldn't allow him to retreat. But it also didn't give him the courage to advance. He was trapped between impulse and fear, between brute force and the doubt slowly flooding his thoughts. For someone like him, being seen hesitating was worse than losing. And yet, he hesitated. The brute's eyes, once burning with fury, now flickered with confusion. He needed to act. He needed to reclaim his territory. He needed to prove to all of Koban that he still ruled the room. So he made the decision that would seal his fate. He stepped forward. One step. The entire cafeteria leaned forward with him, as if the air itself had shifted in weight. Another step. Inmate 407 narrowed his eyes. Not in fear, but in anticipation. Another. Goro raised his shoulders, puffed out his chest, and extended his hand, ready to grab the old man by the collar. It was his signature move, the opening act of every lesson in respect he delivered. But this time, there would be no lesson. There would be a fall. And then it happened. The old man stood up. Not fast, not abruptly. So smooth it seemed impossible to reconcile that movement with the danger seconds away from exploding. He simply placed his hands on the table, rose to his feet, and stood with such a lined, precise, controlled posture that the gesture alone disarmed Goro before any contact was made. Goro's eyes widened. He finally understood. That posture, that breathing, that balance. It wasn't the stance of an ordinary old man. It was the stance of a master. The old man took half a step to the side, shifting his weight onto his back foot. The kind of movement only someone who trained their entire life would recognize. The kind of gesture that precedes something definitive, not violent, but final. Goro lunged to grab him, and failed. The old man rotated his wrist gently, placed his hand on Goro's arm with such delicacy it looked like a friendly touch. But it wasn't. It was technique. It was calculation. It was the perfect application of something most they would never fully understand, using the opponent's own momentum against him. In one seamless motion, no noise, no force, no brutality, he shifted Goro's center of balance. It was elegant, precise, silent, a movement so clean many inmates didn't even catch it. They only understood when the sound echoed through the cafeteria, a heavy, dry thud. Goro's massive weight collapsing under his own imbalance. The brute fell to his knees. Not because he was pushed, not because he was hit, but because he was defeated by his own misdirected strength. The old man had merely guided him, and that merely stunned the entire prison. The inmates closest to the scene widened their eyes. Others stepped back instinctively. Some even clutched their chests, shocked. Even the guards on the mezzanine froze, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The old man hadn't struck him, hadn't shoved him, hadn't hurt him. He had used technique, balance, and intelligence, and he dropped the brute in seconds, literally seconds. Goro stayed on his knees, breathless, unable to comprehend how it happened. His entire world, built on physical dominance, collapsed with his body. When he finally lifted his gaze, he found the old man standing, calm, breathing steadily, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Inmate 407, for the first time, bowed his head in respect. The most aggressive inmates fell silent. And then the old man spoke the words that would mark Koban forever. True strength doesn't need to destroy anyone. And with those words, the climax was complete. The brute who tried to intimidate the old man fell, not because of force, but because he never imagined who the old man truly was. The cafeteria remained frozen for a few long seconds after the brute fell to his knees, as if time itself had stopped. Even Koban's signature flickering light seemed to hold still. Every inmate, every guard, every pair of eyes in that room was trying to understand how something so simple, so quiet, so fast, had toppled the man who had ruled that space for years through sheer intimidation. The old man, meanwhile, didn't celebrate. He didn't provoke. He didn't display even a hint of superiority. He simply took a deep breath and sat back down with the same serenity he had before it all began. That detail was as unsettling as Goro's fall. Where any other man would have seized the moment to assert dominance, the old man chose humility, and for many, that hit even harder. Goro stayed on his knees, not because his body failed him, but because his mind did. His pride, as rigid as his muscles, was cracked in a way it had never been before. The giant lifted his gaze and found the old man looking at him with a calmness that didn't humiliate, but taught. And that was the difference. The lesson wasn't destruction. It was control. Discipline, emotional mastery, a clear message: true strength doesn't need to diminish anyone. Inmate 407 watched quietly. He recognized that posture, that technique, that look. This was no coincidence, no luck. The old man had a past, a story he would probably never tell, but one revealed in every small, deliberate movement he made. To him, Goro's fall wasn't surprising. What surprised him was seeing the old man offer Goro a chance to stand up with dignity. "Stand," the old man said. Not as an order, but as an invitation. It was at that moment Goro finally understood what had really happened. He hadn't been defeated. He had been shown his own reflection, not the reflection of a leader, but of someone who used strength to mask insecurity. Yes, the fall was physical, but the real collapse happened inside him. Silent, deep, undeniable. Goro drew a breath and rose slowly. The entire prison watched, as if everyone's fate depended on that single movement. When he finally stood, no one laughed, no one mocked, no one celebrated. The transformation was too serious, too meaningful, too big for childish reactions. And then, in front of everyone, Goro did something no one ever imagined they would see. He bowed his head, not in submission, but in respect. The old man nodded, accepting the gesture naturally. The tone in the cafeteria shifted instantly. For the first time in years, brute force was not the center of power. For the first time in years, the inmates saw wisdom triumph over violence. For the first time in years, someone showed them that real strength doesn't need to shout. It needs control. The guards exchanged stunned looks. They knew Koban would never be the same. And deep down, many felt relief. The fall of a tyrant always makes room for balance. When the old man stood once more and began walking slowly toward the exit, the entire cafeteria stepped aside. Not out of fear, not out of intimidation, but out of respect. That day, Koban didn't just learn that the brute had fallen, it learned that the old man was never just an old man. He was someone who carried a lifetime of discipline, someone who knew exactly who he was, someone who showed that real power doesn't need to be seen, only felt. And everyone there felt it. After that day, Koban's cafeteria never functioned the same way again. Rumors about the old man spread through the corridors like legends no one dared question. Goro, once feared by all, began walking in silence, carrying not a defeat, but a transformation. Inmate 407 watched it all with renewed respect, knowing he had witnessed something rare, the fall of raw power and the rebirth of true authority. And the old man, he remained discreet, almost invisible, except to those who knew the truth. He didn't defeat Goro, he awakened him. If this story held your attention all the way to this point, then you're the kind of person who doesn't run from a good narrative, the kind that surprises you, hits you emotionally, and sticks in your mind for days. Before you go, strengthen this chain. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the intense stories I've got coming next. Drop a comment below telling me what impressed you the most about the old man's turnaround against the brute. I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. And when you're done, pick another video on the channel and keep this marathon of powerful stories going.